We have Alia Rasul alongside us today to celebrate International Women's Day and to kick off Women's History Month. So we're gonna do our introduction a little bit differently this time though, because typically I have this whole spiel of like introducing our guests, but this time I'm gonna ask Alia to introduce herself. So,
okay.
Yeah. So if you could introduce yourself in a 30-second elevator pitch, what would you say?
I guess like I don't even need the 30 seconds. So my usual spiel is, hi, my name is Alia Rasul, and I am a writer, performer, comedian based out of Toronto, Ontario. And everything I do basically is at the core of it is to uplift Filipinas. So all of my projects at the core, at its spirit, is all about uplifting Filipino women. That's me.
That's us. Uplift us, Alia, please.
Yes.
Let's all rise.
Get on.
We love to see it. And many of your viewers, actually, I'm sure many of us know you from Tita Collective. And can I just say that when I was sitting at your POP show, I was at the very front, actually, and that was my very first time witnessing a performance of yours. And I kid you not, I was just like laughing, crying, dying, like literally every emotion I was feeling at the same time. And ever since then, I've been in awe. And you guys have been such an inspiration, role models to me, and I'm sure to many of us. So having said that, I know that Tita Posh is so iconic. And can you walk us through how you created this character and where did you draw your inspiration from?
Tita Posh. So, I mean, I guess for folks who don't necessarily know what the Tita Collective is, we are a multidisciplinary group of all Filipino artists, specifically in the theater, dance, and arts. And we created a show called Tita Jokes, which we presented at POP, which was honestly one of the hottest shows that we've ever done.
Yes.
Like, it was amazing. Like, honestly, I can still remember the feeling of finishing that show and being like, oh, we connected today. And yeah, so the Tita Collective is basically made up of Tita Posh, Tita Ginger, Tita Scary, Tita Bago, Tita Baby, and Tita Boy, right? And Tita Posh. So overall, I think like for the show, like we all agreed that it would be a love letter to Titas. And the whole point of it is like as sort of an act of resistance, I guess, or a rebellion, where as actors and writers and performers, we're used to being told that there can only be one of you at a time. And so we were like, F that, here's 6 of us at the same time, you know? And so every single Tita, then, you know, the idea is that like the Filipina experience is not a monolith. And even beyond the 6 of us, there are a lot of diverse experiences about being a Filipina as opposed to like what's kind of shown in the media, right? So for me, Tita Posh, I had a choice about Tita Posh. Originally I was like, is she kind of like, you know, like an Imelda, Forbes Park, Feather Boa, or is she like, you know? So that's sort of where I was thinking. But then I really thought about like, what do I care about? Like, what do I care about? And my entry point was basically like this experience of growing up with a mother who used to sell DXN products all the time. Almost like, I don't know if you know what DXN is, but it's kind of like a multi-level marketing scheme, kind of like the Forever Young product and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that's a side hustle that you see a lot of Filipinas use. So that was my entry point. And like I was like, Tita Posh is gonna hustle a pyramid scheme. The other thing about Tita Posh is that like, I really wanted her to be someone who was like, just like a full character, you know, like she is quirky. She's a bit like, she's a bit wild, eh? She's like kind of an extreme character. She's like, I work 9 to 5, and then after 5, I work 9 to 5. So she works 9 to 5, 5 to 9. And I wanted someone to be like, she's not defined by her relationships. You don't really know anything about her relationships based on the show. She's not defined by her family status. You don't know if she's single, she has kids. The only thing you really know about Tita Posh is that she defines her world the way she wants. And she tells you what she cares about, and that's making money, making money and making hustle and hustling. And then for me, the more I learn about her, it's like, why does she hustle as well? Why does she hustle? Because she wants to provide, So she's kind of like, in a way, like I can be as ridiculous as I want with Tita Posh, because at the core of it, it's because she cares. And kind of the thing about Tita Posh is like, yeah, she's taking the world by storm in a way that she feels is democratic. She's kind of like, Tita Posh is what I use to satirize capitalism and sort of that hustler mentality.
Yes.
And, like as Filipinos, like we're very much entrenched in kind of, a lot of like Western values, right? Capitalism and not so much about community, I guess. So Tita Posh is trying to like marry those two things. So she's like taking capitalism and trying to use it to empower herself to provide for her community. But you know what happens to Tita Posh, right? Like the story of Tita Posh is that she works herself to the bone so that she misses weddings, she misses Christmases, she missed her own despedida. Right?
She left her own despedida.
She left her own despedida because she is so busy. So yeah. So for me, like Tita Posh, so going back to it being a love letter to Titas, Tita Posh is like a love letter to all of the Titas who are just hustling and working really, really hard to provide for their families, but also an acknowledgement that like, Tita, like you're gonna work yourself to the bone. Let's just enjoy your despedida. Like come home a little bit. Yeah. So for me, that's Tita Posh. And it's funny because of all of the characters that I created through comedy, Tita Posh is honestly like, if I really think about it, it's easy to say, yeah, she's based on like Titas that I'm really inspired by. And don't get me wrong, she is, right? She's loud and amazing. But when I think about it, she's also kind of like what I would imagine, like before I realized I could be an artist, I was this like new graduate from university trying to make it in the ad world, because like that was my first job, reading Harvard Business Review and reading like The Art of War and like, like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Like that was me in my early 20s, like really trying to be that person. And I'd imagine she would have grown up to be Tita Posh. So there's a part of me that I'm like, the patterns are starting to repeat.
Yeah.
So the exhaustion that's like being felt by the generation above us, and we can see it, it's also happening to us, So that's kind of a question, like where does that stop? So that's Tita Posh. I don't know if that answered your question. Welcome to my TED Talk.
Thank you. Wow, free TED Talk. Our audience is gonna be coming here and just watching a free TEDx talk by Alia.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And like what makes it a little bit more special too is that what you just said, you kind of had encountered a little bit of Tita Posh's experiences as well as as you explored your professional career as a new graduate at the time. And so that's what makes it a little bit more special to me, seeing you embody that character in a more personal sense.
That is so awesome. Like the moment that I first saw her Hermes bag and I was like, oh my God.
Oh, that part? Wow. When she was wearing it like this?
It's like, I know that, Tita. And that's what's so great about Tita Collective, right? It's because like we're all out here like watching all 6 of you kind of embody every single Tita that we've kind of encountered, as we were growing up. And the thing is, like, Tita Collective has been, as a figure in Filipina confidence and pride And I hope you guys know that. And it's been such a wonderful experience seeing you guys on stage and seeing like, oh my God, like look at them, talk in Filipino accents that are like not ironic, but truly representing, some of the titas that we have in our lives. And I know you've talked about it a little bit about, like the accent thing and how this shouldn't be seen as someone ridiculing, our experiences, but someone who really just is trying to embody someone we know in real life. So I think like that's really important.
Yeah, because it's like, I think the important point there is sort of like the accent thing comes up a lot. And, in comedy, you're always making fun of something, and you're always making fun of someone, right? And so comedy is like, for me, I'm obsessed with comedy. Like, I love comedy, and like my very specific niche in comedy is diversity and inclusion in comedy and anti-oppression in comedy. And like when you're making fun of something and when you're making fun of someone, you need to be very, like, you need to own that choice. Okay. And with accents, I mean, like the rule of thumb is like you always punch up. You never punch down, because you don't kick someone when they're down. You punch up. That the role of like what's the role of the jester in the king's court is to like make light of like issues so that people can, it's like more palatable to talk about. And the Tita Collective, like we take on issues that are, we intentionally took on issues that are difficult to talk about because we wanted to punch up that way. And when with accents, the thing with accents is like most of the time in Hollywood or in TV, it's the punchline of the joke. Right. It's like, oh, it's so funny because you said it in such a funny way, right? It's like a complete otherism. And for us, we use accents because it's home.
Right.
So you have to be intentional with why you use accents. And at the same time, like Tita Posh's accent is actually also like, she dips in and out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I noticed.
In and out. Some other titas are like fully like Tagalog accent, and one of them actually, I think Tita Baby, doesn't have an accent at all, right? So it's sort of like all of those choices are intentional, and we can own that, and it's never to like make fun of titas, which certain famous Filipino comedians will use it as a punchline and like bless them. Right? But for us, we're like, stop making the Filipino women a joke. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're the ones who left the country, build communities across the world to prop the country up, and then created the diaspora. Mm-hmm. For us, that is something so honorable and so important. And like everything we do, even if we make fun of our titas, when we got criticized, we're like, oh, you say you're not going to make fun of them, but you do. I'm like, we're not making fun of them, we're making fun with them. No, they're in it. they're in it.
That's a good one. Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's so that's like recognizing that we're here, man. We're here to have fun, and also at the same time, it's possible for us to uplift like each other. And that actually segues to, our question when it comes to like creativity and like just collaborating with other titas. And I know this pandemic has been hard on all of us, and I don't know how that affects like your dynamic as a group, but how are you motivating each other right now? I know last year we had you had your little tita event in a camp somewhere, and you were able to publish that with Sarsavaji Winnipeg. So that was a cool experience to have like this theatrical experience while at home. Yeah. So how have you been motivating each other during the pandemic? And if you have any upcoming projects, like that would be dope to talk about as well.
Okay. Well, I guess to answer that question, it's also like motivating each other, but also making space for each other. The way the Tita Collective started was because we were 6 young women, 6 young Filipinas, who felt that people didn't really believe in our ability to produce a show, write a show, in a way, in a leadership position. Like we somehow found ourselves kind of like in this position where we're like, okay, well, if we stay where we are, and don't get me wrong, support is really interesting, right? Like when you're supporting underrepresented folks or supporting like marginalized folks, if you don't ask them what they need and actually give them what they need, it's not support, it's tokenism, right? So we were at a position where we're like, we feel a little bit like we're being tokenized. So we're gonna go and heal together. Like we went through a thing together, and the Tita Collective started off as a sisterhood. We didn't have any plans to create anything together. Our main purpose was to be a sisterhood, to be there to make space for each other in any way that we needed. One of those things was like, hey, everyone, I kind of want to make a show. And so we kind of started creating shows together and collaborating a year after we decided to be a sisterhood. And then things kind of picked up and we became the Tita Collective. And that's what people kind of know. Like they're like, oh, Tita Collective, you're a sketch troupe, but before any of that, we're a sisterhood. And why I'm saying this is because at the end of the day, like when you do anything on stage in front of a lot of people, there's going to be ego involved because people are always going to want to be like, who's the prettiest, who's my favorite, who wrote the most things, who do we, do you know what I mean? Like that's like, especially when you're a Filipina or like a QT BIPOC, there's always like, who's the one, and who's the leader, and especially even in our society, it's like, who's the first. For the last, I'm 33, like the last 33 years of my life, and I don't remember the first 5, so whatever. Like everyone, there's always been like the first Filipino who did this. There's always kind of that like the favoritism. And for us, the hardest work of being a community and being a collective and being a sisterhood is deciding and committing that you love each other. You love each other, right? And so when you get to a point where you're like, okay, well, this person is taking on a leadership role and taking on, like, has a lot of attention, and like we all come into the group with like our different strengths and different powers, and the important thing is everyone has value, and that is not tied to their productivity. Everyone has value. So when someone is feeling like, I'm out, I can't right now, because you're committed to love each other and you're committed to make space for each other, you make the time to stop and figure it out and heal as a group. So for us, the struggle is always like how to like battle against, the colonial powers and the capitalistic things. As Tita Collective, honestly, I don't think any of us imagined that people would react to Tita Collective in this way. And it's amazing. It's amazing to get known as a sketch troupe, in my opinion, we're like, the sisterhood is more important than the sketch troupe. Like we have an agreement that like, if this being in a sketch troupe becomes too hard for us as sisters, we would dump the sketch troupe. And so, and why I say like, so motivate means like, it doesn't really matter to us in terms of like productivity. Like we all are also coming into this with different like journeys in our mental health. That's important. We're coming into this with different ambitions. Like some of us really want to go for it. Some of us were like, I did this because this is how I flex artistically, but my other, So making room for all of that and making sure people feel heard and loved, because that's that's kasamahan, right? Like that's bayanihan. It's not like constantly pushing because that's what people want us to do. They're like, no, we'll stop because that doesn't work for us. We're together because we committed to love each other and make sure that we feel supported each time. And so the only reason that I kind of go on a tangent of this, because like even motivating each other is like, sometimes someone's in a really dark place, trying to motivate them is not the best thing to do at that time. It's just like, okay, I love you, I'm here. The door is always open. Because like, and the reason why I'm saying this is like, technically I left the group. So technically I left the group, but we're still working together. It's very complicated. It's not complicated, but for me, because I'm trying to go back to school, and I'm focusing on my other projects. So we talked about it. I was like, I have 5 things I love to do. There are 3 things that I want to work on. And unfortunately, the Tita Collective, as much as I love it, was the 4th thing. Right? And the thing is, like, the sisterhood remains the same. But when people hear someone leaves a group, they're always like, oh my God, what happened? Right? Like your first instinct is like, what happened? Oh my God, that was such a mistake. Like, no, the sisterhood is intact. We just need to make room for people's where they're at right now.
Exactly.
And yeah. And like technically Tita Posh is on a sabbatical, but
sabbatical, yeah.
She's at a conference somewhere. She's at a conference in Europe.
She's just on a trip. She hopped on a plane yesterday. Yes.
She's the top seller in her MLM scheme. So she's
doing a master. Yeah, she's doing masters on MLM.
True. So TBD. But yeah, but that's the most important part, like committing that you're loving your community. Because I think you hear about infighting and crab mentality a lot. And I refuse for that to be like the model that people look at community. You know what I mean? When you hear about Filipino community, that's sort of like the stereotype that you see. And I'm like, let's break that pattern. Let's break it. It's love before ego, always.
Always
with this group.
I love how, you constantly talk about like pushing back against like colonialism and capitalism, and how, because like it really, really drains you down. Like as an artist, I'm sure like you could attest to this. It's always, whenever I see like my friends who are artists, it's always has to be a question of, either doing their best work or selling out. And I love how the Tita Collective has had that agreement that like, if this gets like too hard or it's not fun anymore, like let's just walk away. And I think like that's such a brave choice to be like, this could be lucrative, but also it could be not that fun. So let's go and preserve our sisterhood instead. And that's like so important. So I'm going to jump off and ask you another question. And this is kind of related to that resistance to capitalism as well. But I'm going to ask you about, how you use storytelling to really uplift the community. And I guess you could delve in a little bit more about, the logic behind pushing back against these structures that kind of keep us down, and how you incorporate art to really say that I'm here, have my self-worth against, I'm not tied to my productivity, and I'm here to make art.
Oof. Ooh, what a question. Okay, let's see. Let's unpack that a little bit. Yeah. Why tell stories? I guess for me, the first reason to tell stories, and that's another like pillar of Tita Collective, and also for me as an artist, a pillar is like, and someone like, I don't know, Dr. Thera Pinay on Instagram once tagged us in a thing, and it has like kind of stuck with me for a while. It's like, laughter is a form of resistance. Joy is a form of resistance. If you see a lot of work that's really being like lauded by the mainstream. Like when you see underrepresented artists work, a lot of it for a very long time was all about trauma, trauma. And for a while it was amazing to just be like, oh my God, seeing that is cathartic. But we are at a point where we're like, we're not just here for you to see us suffer. Right? Like, remember all those UNICEF ads where it's like, look at the Philippines, like, and don't get me wrong, right? Like, there is a lot of pain and suffering in this world, but like, you can't. There's a really good TED Talk about the danger of one story, and how people view people from like impoverished countries. Like, they just assume like that's it. Like, y'all are poor, you don't, because you're poor, you're not educated. Because you're not educated, it affects all of us. Right? And so a lot of our work is about like showing that our stories are joyful, and this is like a form of our resilience. One of our main goals, and we're very big about intention setting, because like that is sort of, when you're an artist, you have to be transparent. And I think as a person, like, you have to be transparent about why you do what you do. And our main thing is like, we're gonna gather, like in the pandemic, it's weird to say this, like, we're gonna gather Filipinos in spaces, theater spaces at the time, and we're going to bring our community here, and all we're gonna do is make them laugh and feel good. Because you take that memory, and when it's dark, you'll be like, remember that time when I felt really good? That is actual resistance, and that is actual medicine. I know it's corny to say laughter is the best medicine, but it is one of them. Even the idea of medicine, we're talking about like decolonizing practices, the idea of medicine, you think, oh, Pfizer, Moderna, like the pharmacy. Medicine is like the things that give you joy and that make you feel good. And one of those things is stories. Stories is like oral tradition, for example. That's how we pass down wisdom, right? That's a very important part of storytelling. You pass down and right now I'm obsessed with asking my parents to tell stories. I have this project called 15 Ways My Dad Almost Died.
Oh, do tell.
Which is really dark. Okay, this is it's kind of dark. Okay, but like, so when I was doing stand-up, and I'm like going all over the place, so just like reel me back in. But like, when I was doing stand-up, I wrote a joke about how my dad loved karaoke, and that he loved karaoke so much that when he tried to sing a very high note in Hoobastank's The Reason, the highest note, he like tried to hit it and fell because he got a heart attack trying to hit that note. It's just a true story. And while it was happening,
pause.
I found a ring.
Wow.
And the reason is that part.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Did you try to sue Hoobastank for that?
I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, when was that? Was it 7 years ago? So maybe I don't know. What's the thing? What's the rule? But so of course, at the time, this happened when I was in university. At the time, the most traumatic thing ever. Okay, like it was a terrible time. Like I almost failed that year because I was so upset.
Yeah.
But 6 years later, I decided to like, you know what? Catharsis. Let's write about this thing that was really, really bad. Like my dad died, not a fun story. And then I wrote it. And because me being a weird, awkward comedian, when I was like reading out loud in this like storytelling like workshop, which is very serious thing. But as I was telling the thing, people were like laughing because it's such a ridiculous story. And my favorite thing about all of that is that when I told it to my dad, he loved it.
Oh.
So this thing that was like, obviously having a heart attack personally is like, that is not a fun experience, right? So we were able to do this, take this thing that was an experience that was difficult for me and my family, and especially my dad, and turn it into something that we could laugh about and enjoy and connect about. And for me, that felt really good. And so we sat down. My dad lives in the Philippines. So when I had visited him 2 years ago, I was like, you know what, Pops? Every single one of your stories from when you were like 5 to like obviously heart attack age, is about you almost dying. And he was like, really? And we counted it down. It was like on a napkin. I was like, okay, let's see. Okay, you almost got miscarried, which is like a thing that happens a lot. Another thing is like you fell off a jeepney twice. You almost got stabbed 3 times. You were in like, so my parents are from, my dad's from Honolulu. And I don't know if you know about like the burning of Honolulu back in the Marcos days. So he experienced that, and my dad would always tell these stories with like kind of a lightheartedness, which was bizarre. I don't know if they're like, I think people's parents do that. But for me, I'm like, how could you have survived death like 15 times and not really like have thought about it? Like, man, if I get in an accident, I'm complaining about it and tweeting about it like for forever, And so the more we dug into it, I'm like, these experiences, Pa, shaped you as a person. You became this person who's like, I've got grit, I just move past it. That's a lot of our parents. But because that's who you are and you raised me, these stories shaped who I am as a person. And that's for me was like a big everyone's stories, like from our ancestors, are who we or why we are who we are today. And then we're going to tell stories, and then the next generation, it's going to shape them. It's not just going to entertain them, it's going to shape them. So the more wholesome these stories are, and the better we can tell them from a healthier place, it has the power to move them and like create a world for them. So that's why for me, stories are so important. They could be damaging, so the danger of one story, or they could be healing. And that's why we have to be very, very like thoughtful and intentional about how we tell stories. And that's why we talk about representation all the time and anti-oppression, and just like, when growing up, when all you see is like blonde, blue-eyed teenagers who are twins, I'm aging myself, sweet valley high, and then like when I go into like story mode and all of my stories center what I see, which is, a blonde, blue-haired girl in the snow. I'd never seen snow. Like that tells you something about like, I don't see myself in the world in my brain. So how do you move through the world when you don't even see yourself?
When you're not represented? Yeah.
When you're not represented. But when we're telling the stories about each other, where we are all stars of the show in each other's stories, we're like, I understand the world and I know that you can see me.
Mm-hmm. I'm here.
And I am here, you're here, we're here together. And you don't feel so isolated. That the thing that's really scary, I think, like growing up, was like feeling like I was alone all the time. Even though there's so many Filipinos in the world, there was just this constant feeling like I'm the only one. And I think that's the easiest thing we can break right now. Is just tell our stories to each other, no matter how casually. It doesn't have to be on TV. It doesn't have to be the first Filipina who sang, I don't know, a freaking Marvel song, which I'm saying that, but like also celebrate, you know, you celebrate. But there's something about that. I'm like, okay, well, what about the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the 1000th? Let's celebrate those too.
Yeah, let's keep going.
We always stop at the first. It's always like, okay, that's done. No, let's keep going. You know? So yeah, I don't know if that whole thing answered your question, but like storytelling for me is like medicine that we are underutilizing, and that we have all of the power, and it's within our means, especially with how social media is now, and how like, you know, these channels, like you have an IGTV series and you're like using it to, you know, uplift like Filipinas, like, so yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like, people are scared to tell their stories. And that's the homework. I'm going to give you homework. Why are you scared to tell? Like, why are you scared to tell your story? Go down that rabbit hole.
I'm shy.
Yeah, you're shy. And then like you go, why am I shy? Because I feel like people will judge me. Why do you care if people judge you?
Yeah.
Because, you know, just go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Like once you delve deeper into it, it starts to make sense, because now you're just confronted with these reasons and you're like, no.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're just like, no, I'm gonna do me.
Yeah.
And
yes.
What you just talked about, how storytelling can be so impactful too, I think that reminded me of how storytelling can be told in the simplest forms. That even brought me back to the speaker series that you partook in at Pre-Northern Parliament, and how you presented us with your little family project. That was really cool to see how you used pictures or used different stories from like your dad or from other relatives and family members, and you're able to just kind of consolidate everything and be able to depict an overall picture or even individual stories for them to be told, because it's really important, especially for tracing our lineage, tracing our family history. Yeah, it's really important. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of that, and you seem like you are a very creative person, and it looks like I'm seeing a pattern here where it's like you use art to make sense of the world. And I've been following your Instagram account for a little while now, and I look at your poems and I'm like, yeah, I feel like a suman today. Alia's so right. So I can see how, you know, writing has been very therapeutic for you. So that's a good segue to talk about your exciting project, which is going to be Super Important Filipina Thoughts.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? And is it something that you've always kind of planned to do, or did the pandemic just like, you know, light this bulb in your brain that was like, yep, I'm going to write a book?
So Super Important Filipina Thoughts came out of this like this idea, just basically like I was tired of editing myself all the time. Like I asked myself, like, why do I feel so scared to share who I am and share my stories? And at the end of the day, it was just like this fear of being judged, this imposter syndrome. And to be honest, as Filipinas, like there is that reality that we do face an intersection of sexism and racism, you know, just like the subservient Asian woman. And like Filipinas have a very specific, like, let's label that. It's a reality. And like, I refuse to be silenced because I'm scared of that, because that doesn't make any sense. If I am scared of that, then I technically need to be louder, right? So Super Important Filipina Thoughts was this project of mine where I'm like, Alia, you are going to put out every day for a month. It just started off like December. Actually, it was even a little bit before the pandemic, right? Every day for December, you're going to put out a really like a poem. Didn't even have to be a poem. It could be one line, one word. You're going to put it out there. You're not going to edit it. You're just going to accept it. And the wild thing about that is like, I did not expect people to be like, I literally wrote one thing where like, I feel like a suman, which is like, what is that?
But I felt it.
What is that?
Yeah.
Like,
I feel
But
like
it makes sense, you know? Once you hear it, once you see it, you're like, facts.
but you're saying that now, but like a part of me was like, what? Who would? Why? Because you've been taught to like these things don't really translate to other people, but like people were like sharing like, I feel like a suman. I'm like, what? So it kind of empowered me to be like, hey, let's do this. Let's get as weird as possible, and get as vulnerable as possible. Like, I think at the end of the day is like when you find yourself as an artist feeling safe enough that you can be vulnerable, you find that you can touch other people, like in terms of, you can move other people, which I was so grateful for how people received that. Like my weird, and I call it super important Filipina thoughts, even though the thoughts are like as silly as stupid, because the point is this, even your silly, stupid thoughts, like even being like, let's do a project pod called 15 Ways That You Almost Died. Like those ridiculous thoughts, all you need is like care and energy and curiosity for them to become something. So that means every little nugget of your thoughts, pay attention to it. How you're feeling. Something made me feel weird. Because that means like you're witnessing your own life instead of passing it by. When things are like, so I used to, because you get used to being like, okay, I feel really weird, but the goal is this. So I'm going to ignore how I feel to get to the goal. We find ourselves in that position a lot. Or I feel really disrespected right now, but I'm going to be the bigger person and ignore how I feel so we can get to this goal. No. Integrate. What is that feeling? Why do you feel like that? And one way for me, I'm like, why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like this? You can't always unpack it at the time. Also do it with a therapist. Therapist's great. But write it down, because that means something and it's going to grow into something as long as you put time, care, and energy into it. And you put time, care, and energy when you think things are super important. So for me, I'm like, me saying like, I have one where I literally went to my fridge and listed all of the cheeses that I have. And then I'm like, oh yeah, like I have Kraft singles, brie, double brie, Havarti, I'm lactose intolerant. So stupid. But I'm like, nope, that's a super important thought. We're going to put it down. And you know what? One day, maybe it'll be a book. So yeah, you just have to like take that power. And for me, I struggle all the time. Like even right now, even though I wrote 160 pages of poems throughout the year pandemic, right now, I struggle to write those poems. So when you feel as like you can write those poems, cherish that moment, preserve it, because like in a year, you might struggle to do that. So it's important.
Being able to look at your work and see how far you've come, and then thinking and laughing at, oh, on this day you were feeling that way, or this is what you wrote. Because like even for me personally, I've been journaling consistently for the past year, and there was one time where I sat down and I looked at, let's say May 2020, and I was like, wow, that's funny.
Yes.
Like I'm funny.
Yes. Yeah, but at the time you're probably feeling like, nah, who cares, this is nothing, right? But in 20 years from now, like imagine if you found right now like your mother's journal, right? Or your like an ancestor's journal or something like that. Wouldn't that be such a treasure? For me, it would be. Like I know everyone has different relationships with their parents, but for me, I'm like, this is treasure. So you have to treat your own thoughts as treasure, because they're important. Even a stranger, man, if I like, okay, this is weird, but if I found like a diary of someone's and I was like, whoa, this person has some weird thoughts, but I'm into it, like that's still treasure. So yeah, so like we just need to decide for ourselves, like our thoughts are Filipina thoughts, and our Filipina thoughts are like complex and not always about suman. Sometimes they're about charcuterie. but because of who I am and how I grew up and the fact that I'm a member of the diaspora and I'm not necessarily I'm from a third thing, which is a mix of the two worlds. Because of that, because I am who I am, my thoughts about charcuterie are Filipina. Right? So I'm just going to own that. No one's going to tell me like, well, that's not really Filipina. It's not about like adobo, right? I'm like, well, some days I feel like adobo. Some days I feel like prosciutto. And in all those days, I was Filipina. So
I love that.
So that's the book. That's the book.
The book is about being unapologetically you. And we love that. And we can't wait for it.
We love it. And the fact that you touched on, you know, there isn't just one single Filipina experience, especially if you grew up in I know that you've moved different times in your life. So that must have been just already a collective of experiences in and of itself. So you can, like, nobody can define that except for you.
Yeah.
So on top of Super Important Filipina Thoughts, can we talk a little bit more about any upcoming projects that you're up to and what are you looking forward to this year?
Oh man, other projects that I'm up to. Well, I talked about 15 Ways My Dad Almost Died, which is this project that I'm co-writing with my father. So send me all of the love.
Oh, so is he like super involved with the writing process and?
Oh yeah, 1,000%. I mean, it's his stories at the end of the day, and it's between. And honestly, I'm still figuring out, but my family has been Zooming every day since the beginning of the pandemic. Okay, and it's a lot, but at the same time, like I started recording them, and it's been awesome. And with my dad, like, it's his story and like he cares about it and I care about it. And I want to make sure he feels honored in it. So we're co-writing it. And so we'll see what happens with that. But other than that, I'm working on Tawa Festival, which is the Filipino Comedy Festival at the end of Philippine Heritage Month. And it's in its 4th year, which is wild. And again, it's all about a celebration of storytelling. So we're going to expand it to have more storytelling. And it's just like to bring awareness of like, again, like everything I'm about is like, let's uplift each other and let's like remember how important storytelling is for us, you know, and remember how important it is to take up space. So that's more on that later, but like, yeah. So this year is going to be virtual, but bigger than ever before, because I think I'm going to program more folks on it and just see the kinds of stories people are telling during the pandemic.
We love that. Do you want to tell our viewers how we can access these projects or if we can pre-order anything?
Oh yeah, so I guess like overall, I mean, I think the thing that I'm most active on is Instagram, which is at Alia Rasul.
Put that here.
At Alia Rasul. There's a bit more about everything that I do, aliarasul.com. I am working on a project called the Mari Mari store. And so the Mari Mari store is all about everything in it is a token of love. So it's not really a store, it's more like it's just a series of projects. And I work with artists that I have like artist crushes on to create editions. So my first edition, technically my first edition was like a Kumare Mahal Kita, which is a zine that I created. So instead of sending like a Christmas card, you send this zine and it's all about love letters to your Kumare. And then my first collab, that word, was with an artist named Christina Corey, who does analog collages. And we took a poem that I wrote, as saying, you are the toyo to my calamansi. And she created a collage based on that. And this is what it looks, oh, here we go. This is what it looks like.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so we created and this is a Kumare Mahal Kita, that's the Christmas scene. Kumare Mahal Kita. yeah, so the Mari Mari store is all about working with like artists and creating tokens of love to send from one Filipina to another Filipina. I mean, I'm very much focused on one like Filipinas, but it's really for everyone. Yeah. And then Tawa, like I'll have more news on Tawa at on my Instagram and my website, but I started an Instagram which has nothing on it called at Tawa Comedy Fest, I think. Yeah, at Tawa Comedy Fest. And that's going to be happening the last weekend of June. So that's gonna be really fun.
Amazing. And we'll be sure to keep an eye out too and share on our platforms because as we should, right?
Yeah, thank you.
So before I actually jump into my final question here, I want to briefly talk about my 2 key takeaways from what I've personally learned from you so far. So one is the power of prioritizing can go a long way. And that is just going back to how you were able to obviously just list down your goals and your priorities. And you want to make sure that throughout that entire process, you know, you're not jeopardizing anything. You're able to still make sure that you have your priorities in check, but in your case, you're preserving your sisterhood simultaneously. So that was really important for me to learn. And then moving with intention. That's what I like to say to myself too. I think that personally, I make sure that whatever I do in life really has a reason behind it, and making sure that everything you do is rooted in passion and sustainable impact. And I think that's what you've touched on. So thank you for sharing that. Hopefully that was
yeah, no, yes, yeah, no, it was cool to like, yes.
Yeah, because when you were talking, I was like writing just different notes down. I was like, wow, I'm writing this down on my journal today.
Great, yes.
Just to close off, what would you tell a young Filipina as they navigate or explore their cultural identity?
Oh, good question. This is a really straight, like, I don't even know if this is advice that applies to everyone. But one of the things that was was kind of a turning point for me was going back to who I was when I was young, like 6, 7, 8, 12, right? And looking back at the things that she cared about and kind of developing this relationship where like I am her ate. So what are the things that I want to put out into this world for this young person who I understand really well because she's me? And what would I want to do to protect her, to uplift her, to love her as her big sister? And one of the things that's really, really bizarre that I'm starting to learn about who I was in my younger self is like, she kind of had a really good idea of what she wanted, you know, and somewhere throughout the way, she was like, okay, well, the thing that I thought was important, the world's telling me that's not important, you know? But then going back to being like, even like the ideas that she used to care about, I'm like, okay, as her ate with an open mind, let's go back and see what we can do with that idea. Why that is a turning point is because you soon realize you're like, everything that I needed to succeed was in here. And now I have to give myself, carve out the time to really revisit that revisit that. And obviously, again, therapy, sometimes you need it, you know, healing, and you need an infrastructure to carry you as you go through that process, depending on what your journey has been from then to here, right? And the other things, like carve out time for myself to be like, when I'm older, this version of me, like, what would I do so that I feel cared for and supported and loved? Because it's important as a community for us to like love each other. But you are very, very much like, in terms of power, you have the most power to really like love yourself. And of course, I'm saying like everyone has like different privileges and things like that, right? But at the end of the day, like when you're at your most alone, the only person with you is you. So you should hope that that person loves you. So yeah, so I guess like just do that thought exercise. Try to remember who you were when you were really young and try to build a relationship with her, because ultimately it's like really you just getting to know you and really like giving yourself a chance, like let's review all of the things that I love about myself. And that became like very, very instrumental to me being like, even my first poem, the entire Super Important Filipina Thoughts is really like, what are the things that like a young me who used to buy these like indie like poetry books that were like, I'm like, okay, I don't get this, but it looks cool. Like if she bought this book, would she be like, oh man, that's just kind of cool. She's weird, but she's kind of cool. And like, yeah, like she sees, you know, like this is a world where Filipino voices and therefore me is important. So yeah, so that's the main thing, I guess, like to crystallize that is like, yeah, just carve out time for yourself to really notice your thoughts and integrate what you feel and just be like, man, I felt really weird today. I'm gonna sit still and be like, why is that weird? That actually matters in terms of like you feeling like you understanding who you are, because that's what matters. When you move with intention, you have to know who the person is in setting that intention, right?
That's so powerful.
It's like purpose and intention. Like there are different parts of you. Sometimes you'll have an intention and you're like, where did that come from? Oh, it came from capitalism. And that's Tita Posh.
Sadly.
Wow. That is beautiful. Thank you. What a way to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much,
I'm
Alia.
sweating.
For
I
your
have chills though.
work. Wow. It's funny because me and Daniela have this running joke where we literally say to each other, know yourself. Like every time we end the call, know yourself as you should.
As you should.
And this
Yes.
is really the meat of, you know, our conversation here with Alia. It's like, you shouldn't be afraid of you. Confront, you know, what you're feeling, because you're alive and you deserve to know yourself as you should. So thank you so much again to our guest, Alia Rasul. Follow her on Instagram. She's on there. She's very active, and her poems.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah, and just some parting thoughts. Is Super Important Filipino Thoughts available now for pre-order?
Yes, it's available for pre-order on Anak Publishing's website, but you can find it on my Instagram also. It's a long link. You'll find it on @Alia Rasul.
Well, again, thank you so much for your time. We're so happy to have you today. Happy International Women's Day.
Yes, celebrate yourself.
Celebrate
us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is like an amazing, thank you. I love everything FILCASA does. So if you ever need Tita Posh or Alia Rasul, oh my gosh, you know, I'm here. So thank you.
We'll be knocking at your door for sure. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, come all the time. Happy International Women's Day.
Yes.